Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hello again, and here I am yet one more time on Meanwhile Here on Earth, your intrepid host, as the voiceover says, on this summer day, and summer with a vengeance in a lot of this country and around the world. If you are in a high heat zone, you have our sympathies and concerns. I've been in touch with friends all over the country the last few days, and in France, Italy, Greece, and temperatures are frightening in some places. Stay hydrated, or if you're listening to this show months after the fact and it's snowing out, wear that extra layer of polar fleece. My guest tonight is an old friend and a major contributor to our knowledge about the wider area of UFO studies, and in particular, surrounding the abduction phenomenon. And I'm going to take a moment here and bring up his info. Mike Clelland has had many callings as author, illustrator, wilderness traveler, podcaster, and UFO researcher. His books fall into two contrasting categories. First came funny outdoor instructionals with cartoons. These taught the technical skills of skiing, climbing, mountain travel, glacier rescue, and ultralight backpacking. Next came a more thoughtful series, an inquiry into the relationship between owls and UFOs. Mike's 2015 book, and a very well-received book it was for all the right reasons, The Messengers, was met with high praise. In it, he explores the mysterious connections between owls, synchronicities, and UFO abduction. It was his firsthand experience with these elusive events that have been the foundation for his research. This book is also a personal memoir and a journey of self-discovery. His website is mikeclelland.com, and his last name is spelled Clelland, mikeclelland.com, and we'll give that to you again at the end of the show. It's a comprehensive resource of his research and creative output. After 25 years of living in the Rockies, he now lives in the Pacific Northwest. And Mike Clelland in Seattle, welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Thank you. It's my honor to be here.
And mine as well. We recently did an interview for my British podcast, UAP Global Perspective. And we covered so much interesting material that we can now leisurely cover again, and with more time on it. But as is my wont and usual habit, I personally always have an interest in how people in public life became the people that we come to admire and follow and read and look forward to information. Can we start at the beginning? Where were you born?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan. And that would have been in 1962. I'm going to be 61 years old in about a month. So,
you were literally born with Motown.
I was in the heart of it. Oh yeah, there was radio at the radio stations growing up. It's really funny. I mean, that was CKLW, and the radio stations growing up were, I was right in the heart of it. Yeah.
If you were,
I didn't grow up in Detroit proper. I was raised in a suburb right on the border of Detroit, Southfield, Michigan. So,
well, that music was probably filling your mother's head while you were in utero. So,
my mother was a little more square than that. I don't know if she was listening to Motown, but so Perry Como maybe. But yeah, so
okay, not a lot of Marvin Gaye and the Supremes.
Yeah.
Okay. Siblings?
one brother, one sister, both older. I was the baby. You know what I say is I was the very last person. So my dad went, I think I'm the very last baby boomer. Like I'm the last one. Like they closed the door after. I think there's a picture of me in like the history of baby boomer. I'm the very last one. So, and the joke I make, which isn't really a joke, is I grew up in this kind of Leave It to Beaver neighborhood, and I used to make a joke that I was the last person to be born and raised in the 1950s, even though I was born in 1962. So,
well, there is the sophistication I had as a child based on that wonderful and lovable and incredibly innocent character. What did your parents do? Was your mom a mom pretty much?
My mom was totally a mom.
Well?
She worked at the school system a little bit as a secretary. My dad worked for General Motors. So the Chevys in the driveway and everyone up and down both sides of the street. And we're all, all worked for the car companies. And so, yeah, it was a chapter of American history that I suspect has changed greatly in the last 60 years as far as but there was no, it was General Motors, Ford, Chrysler. That's it. That defined the entirety of everything for those years. And lots of muscle cars. I don't know if this happens, but it seemed like everyone in high school had like a couple of, like 2 Volkswagens, one they were taking apart and one they were putting together. So, and they figured out every way to turn them into dune buggies and dragsters and hot rods and stuff like that. Yeah. So
I grew up so outside of the car culture, but wanting a car, which at least I got to borrow my parents' car occasionally. A Plymouth 63, metal flake blue, very nice. By the time you were proceeding along in elementary school and had cracked the code of reading books, were there any particular books once you got beyond See Dick and Mary Go that you started to gravitate toward when you were on your own in the world of reading?
My more formative stuff happened, I guess, more in high school and stuff like that. Those are the ones that really kind of like, meant something to me. That was 1984 and Catcher in the Rye and that kind of stuff. But and Kurt Vonnegut definitely at that. I was right at that age, and that was right at like. This was the era. I don't know what's going, like the era of the garage sale. And being able to just ride your bike around and just like pull into a garage sale and like, that book looks great, and then to pick up like All the President's Men or Jaws or Kurt Vonnegut so that was definitely that, or Lord of the Rings or The Teachings of Don Juan. That was the era. Those books were everywhere. And so what's interesting, the very first, it's hard to know exactly, but I can say one of the very first like fat books, like the kind you sort of graduate the first time you read the fat book, like the bigger.
A great way to describe it
was Frank Edwards' Flying Saucer Serious Business. I just found it. It was in my brother's room. I don't know what it was, when I just found it, and I was like, I remember kind of opening it and kind of, well, let me read the whole thing. I can't remember much of it, but it was a lot of. Just like report after report after report.
I'm familiar with the book. Yeah, it was a national bestseller for sure. When you were still in elementary school or just beyond that, and watching movies, did your introduction to the world of film come from going to the movie theaters on your own or with friends or your parents, or from watching movies on television?
Well, both, really. I mean, so on television, there was something that was called the 4 o'clock movie. You must have had it on the East Coast. Yeah, like the 4:30 movie, I think is what it was called. And it was right when you got home from, always had like Fantastic Voyage or Planet of the Apes or Soylent Green or something like that. So those movies were, I was totally the perfect age for all that. And then I went to school. I went to NYU Film School. That was my major. For the 1 year, I dropped out after my first year, but I was a film major for 1 year. So if you have any questions about Citizen Kane, I can answer them. So,
Still one of my favorite films.
Yeah, as it should be. Yeah.
Greg Toland, one of the greatest cameramen of all time, and one of the most innovative. We're still using his techniques. Was the Frank Edwards book your introduction to the world of UFOs, flying saucers, UAPs, as we call them now sometimes, or was there something before that?
Well, it's hard to know what was before, but when I was about I would have been in elementary school when I read that Frank Edwards book. I don't know if I read the whole thing. I bet you I skimmed
Sure.
the pages. I can't be sure. But but I had a UFO sighting when I was 12. So that would have been 7th grade. And I don't know if we talked about this, but you and I may have talked about this personally. I don't think we talked about it in the last podcast we did.
Yeah, let's tell our viewers about it, please.
So in like the grand scope of my life, it's not that interesting. It's kind of like, oh, okay, well, but what it did do was afterwards, when I read like UFO reports or I saw something on television about UFOs or something, or I could say, well, I saw one. These people would be, there's a little, there were actually some above board, even keeled documentaries made for television in that
Yes,
era.
there were. UFOs
So that would have been the era of
flying saucers are real.
In search of. Yeah. So those treated the subject very seriously and didn't have debunkers on, and so I was like, I had seen something myself, so I had that as a foundation, or that was like part of me, So I couldn't say, well, these I guess I have to trust these people. So my event was, I was 12 years old, which was little, and I had a friend, and his name was Kenny, and I was at his house. And at the time, like, I was drawing a lot at that point. So I was drawing and we would draw together. And I remember we would spend a lot of time at the kitchen table that day. And so the sun was down, and he had moved out of the neighborhood and lived a little bit away. So my dad had to drive me to the house. And so I had to sleep over. He had a big family and stuff. And I had he grew up right down the street from me as a little kid. But in the night, the sun was down. We walked into his bedroom, as my recollection was, the bedroom was dark, and we just walked into the bedroom. And it was dark outside, and he had a window, and it was either him or me went, look, what is that? And out the window would have been do I have something here? A coffee can shaped thing. So something roughly shaped, this is too big, obviously, but a coffee can shaped, a cylinder, essentially, in the air. And it was descending at this very odd angle. Let me see if I'm doing this right. And I think it was descending like this. At this very odd, very controlled, very odd. You know what I liken it to? So we did the thing, like, it wasn't a helicopter, it wasn't a balloon, it wasn't a reflection on the. We moved right up to the glass. So if it was a reflection on the glass, we were like, we would have.
That's
so
right.
It wasn't a reflection on the glass, and it had like a coffee can essentially with a pencil sticking out of the top, but it would have essentially been all black. And you know how in the suburb sky, even on the blackest night, in the street lights and stuff, like there's this.
You've got ambience.
You've got a little ambient glow. So
yes.
It was darker than the ambient glow.
Okay.
Though it had a series of lights on it. So when it was rotating like this, you could see that there were like a dotted row of lights. You could see that it was rotating.
Wow.
And then we watched it for maybe 30 seconds and it disappeared. Like poof, gone. And there was another associated light in the sky with it. Like a little dot, dot, dot. Now that light was not interesting. It looked like nothing more than an airplane in the sky. But it this is tough to explain. So this one was descending, and the little dot, dot, blink, blink, blink. When the blinking light met it, it vanished. And then the blinking light just like went off into the sky, and there was nothing. So that's and I remember, this is an odd detail. I remember thinking at the time, when that little dot touches it, it's going to disappear. And it did. It disappeared right in that instant. And both of us were like, oh, whoa, 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 what was that? It felt like it was fairly close to the house. So wow. It might have been small. Let's say the size of a van. It's tipped on its side. I bet you it was bigger than that, but it was probably smaller than a school bus, let's say. So it's impossible to know. It was in the nighttime sky. If it was far away, it could have been enormous. If it was close up, it would have obviously been smaller. But my sense is it was bigger than a van and smaller than a school bus. And then we ran downstairs and we both drew it. And we both drew the same thing. I contacted him decades later, probably 35 years later, and asked him about it. Do you remember that night? And he said, no, I don't remember that night. And he said, oh, he had been. So anyway, he contacted me later, a couple days later, and called me back up. And he said, I talked to my mom. She remembers the night we came downstairs and drew it.
Oh my gosh.
So it is somewhat confirmed. Yeah, so that's a confirmation to a very strong degree, and which I didn't really need the confirmation. I feel I still have the drawing.
That was my next question.
It's in the messengers. It's early on in the messengers. I have an image of that drawing. And then so after that, it was like I felt like, okay, I've seen something. And then afterwards, at the same age as 12 years old, I had an associate, which I've told this story many times. This is a little more telling. I had I was at a high school football game, 12 years old, and I wanted to come home and see the television show Kolchak the Night Stalker, which was Friday nights at 10 o'clock on Channel 7. And I was so jazzed. I was 12 years old. It was a perfect show for a 12-year-old with zombies and vampires.
It's a great show.
Yeah, Darren McGavin, yeah.
Stands up very well.
And so so we got to a point walking home. I was with a friend. His name was also Mike. We got to the point. The high school was very close to my house, less than a half a mile. So we walked through this totally idyllic suburban neighborhood and cross the main road and then get into my neighborhood. And I know exactly where I was in the sidewalk. And then the sky lit up orange for 1 second and then turned back to normal. Like it just went click, click. Like the whole sky in my memory lit up bright, electric, rich orange, like the color of when the coals of a campfire or the coals of it just start burning down, you get that rich, radiant orange. The whole sky did that for 1 second. Just click on, click off, and we both would just, what just happened? Like, was it an explosion off over the horizon? Did like the power lines zap each other? There was totally silent. There was no sound, and I was right down the street. It was just a half a block away. I walk into my door. My friend lived further on in the neighborhood, so he just had a block or a few blocks to walk. And then I walk in the door, and my parents were like so mad at me. Like, where have you been? And I'm like, I said I'd be home at 9:30. It's 9:30, and they pointed to the clock. Or they pointed at the television, and the 11 o'clock news was ending. So it would have been very close to 11:30. So that roughly 2 hours of missing time. And it didn't mean, like there was no sense of, I mean, the term missing time hadn't come into the vernacular yet. So I was just like, why are my parents mad at me? I didn't do anything wrong. And the next Monday at school, my friend Mike said, I was kind of saying, we were with some friends, and I said, yeah, something happened on Friday night. And he said, yeah, we saw a UFO with lights and everything. And I was like, good grief. Like, I never saw a UFO. I saw the sky turn orange. So that event has stuck with me. That seems much more telling than just seeing the coffee can in the sky.
Very much so. Did Mike ever mention anything about his parents' reaction when he got home, arguably about the same lateness?
I talked to him a couple of summers ago. I hadn't talked to him we graduated in 1980, and it was like, well, it was probably 3 or 4 summers ago. It was probably 2020 when I talked to him. So 40 years later. And we'd been friends on Facebook and so chatted and stuff but I said, hey, I got to ask, do you remember that night? And he's like, nope, don't remember anything. And I said, well, here's the story. And I told essentially the story I just told you. And he laughed when he said the F word, when he actually said the lights. He said a little more than the lights. He was a little more forceful with his expletives than I shared with you just now.
Yeah.
But, so I quoted him exactly, and he laughed, and he said, I don't remember. And I said, yeah, my parents were mad at me. And he was like, I remember your parents were angry at you. I remember you telling me that. I remember that.
Interesting.
So that's a little bit of a confirmation, and I have to believe that it happened because so much. I remember. Pardon?
Your parents' reaction of you as a young person being missing, essentially based on when you said you were going to get home. And, it sounds like you were a very straight up kid. You weren't, this is not some presenting sign of you,
I was not a juvenile delinquent yet.
And you're not an adult delinquent either.
Yeah.
But your parents' reaction to, you said you were going to be home at X and you're home at Y. Can you think of any other time in your life as living with your parents in their home where they ever had a reaction like that? To something you had said? Or?
So that was a standalone event as far as that. That's my only missing time event that I know of, where it feels like I feel like I've had a lot of stuff happen in my life. None of it seems to be in the realm of missing time. I've been in situations where I'm like, look, what's the clock say? Did we miss any time and stuff like that?
Yeah.
So that would be, that's the only event that I had that had missing time.
By the time you graduated high school, did you have your heart or your dreams set on a certain career, or were you thinking about, sticking around and working in the auto industry?
I worked for you know what I did? I did not apply for college right out of high school. And I've thought about that now, and it's a little telling how, like, the person I am in a way. I was like,
that's usually a middle-class reflex. We all did. Most of us did, if we were lucky enough to have that opportunity.
Well, I was totally like, but I got a job at an ad agency near my house, and I could ride my bike to this ad agency, WB Donor in Southfield, Michigan. And I think it's still there. It's not in the same building anymore, but it's still there in the phone book. And they did the Tootsie Pop commercial. How many licks does it take to get to the center of the Tootsie Pop? That was WB Donor in Southfield, Michigan. So, which also has an owl in it. I don't think that means anything, but it does have an owl in it, that commercial. So, but I worked for a year at an ad agency, and what it did is when I went to NYU the next year, like, I had been in an environment where I was getting a paycheck. I was treated as an equal in a creative team. Like, I was doing illustrations, and I was working with an art director and a writer, and we were creating TV commercials. And then when I got to college, it was like, ooh, this is like, felt like a step backwards in some ways. So I was a very skilled illustrator, and I knew I could just get a job at an ad agency. And that had much more appeal to me, to work in New York rather than go to school. I hung out with the same friends. I managed to sneak in to see some amazing movies for the next bunch of years at NYU. So I knew they had what's the syllabus, where they would show, for the film school, they would show movies.
Sure.
So they would have a list of all the movies, and they would play them on Saturday, all the movies that they played in the week. Because that was back in an era when they had to rent. They had a 35 millimeter projector in a little theater right off Washington Square. And I knew enough people I could just walk in and see the movies, even though I hadn't dropped out of school. But so you could go in on, I remember there was more than one occasion where I sat through 7 movies on a Saturday. It started at 9 o'clock at Saturday morning, and it was way in the nighttime. And you come out, you're all strung out and blew your head in.
That's heroic.
Like so yeah, and they were all great. They were like like classic film noir, followed by, Visconti's The Leopards, followed by, some Louis Buñuel film. It was, oh, wow. It was so great.
I have to jump in here and say, the summer that after I graduated high school, before I left for Connecticut to attend my first year at the University of Bridgeport, I worked for a small ad agency in Manhattan in the East 70s, the Wayne Alpert advertising agency. 2 guys named Wayne and Alpert. Mm-hmm. And I did drawings based on their ideas. And I at least had the chance before the end of my job, when I realized what I don't want to do with my life is work in an advertising agency.
Mm-hmm.
But I got a chance to see an ice cream package that I had designed in freezer cabinets in the local supermarket, and a mascara packaging that was based on my design. So, I was already kind of immortal in my own mind. But you also remind me, in the 80s, there were a number of second-run theaters in Manhattan.
Oh, it was heaven. It was heaven.
6 months after the film came out, you got to see it for next to nothing. And my favorites were, there was one revival theater. It was on 8th Avenue in the 50s. And they had special showings that began at midnight. And it was often 3 or 4 Warner Brothers 30s gangster films that went until like 5 or 6 in the morning. And what fun to come out at dawn, cross-eyed, tired, and remembering every machine gun blast that you had heard. Good times.
Yeah. The repertory theater scene, as far as the film repertory theaters, I had a day planner. I lived on Sullivan Street between Spring and Broome, and I had this day planner, and then I would get all the pamphlets because there was no internet, right? So you'd get a little pamphlet, and it would have like the Film Forums movies, and then they would have the Theater 80 movies.
That's right.
And then they would have the Bleecker Street Cinema movies, and then they would have.
You just grab the brochures or the broadsides.
Or they would have the Museum of Modern Art.
There.
Yeah, and then I would put it all in the day planner. So that way, I could write it down. So here's the movies I was going to see for the next couple of months.
I'll just share one other movie memory, which was about 6 months after Taxi Driver came out. It was in second run at a wonderfully sleazy theater on West 42nd Street. And I guess it started about 8 o'clock or something. I went in with my friend Saul Ostrow. And we come out and we step out onto 42nd Street when it was still very much like it was characterized in the film. It's raining slightly. Prostitutes are walking by. We step out into the street and go, let's walk.
Yeah.
For real. Did you, at that point, you're now living in New York. You've gone through the things that you've gone through. At that point, did you set your sights on a career maybe based in your artistic skills, or was there sort of an opening? And I guess what I'm getting at here is, when did you first start to have an awareness that things were a little different for you than they were for other people in terms of non-standard experiences, I'll call them?
So those events, like I had when I was 30, I had a real powerhouse of an event that shook me up. So basically I lived in New York City in my 20s. From 19 to 29, I lived in New York City. And for a little bit in there, I was a ski bum. I went for a winter and was a ski bum in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And then I moved out to Jackson Hole, and then I moved back to Maine, and then I kind of spent some time in New York City. So there's a few years in there where I was all over the place. And but while in Maine, in the winter of 92, 93, so it would have been in January or February of 1993. Good God. 30 years ago? Did I do that right? Yeah, half a lifetime ago for me. And I was alone in this house in Maine, and so there came a point in 1992 where I started obsessively reading UFO literature. I read Bud's books. I read probably even, let's say 1991, I started obsessively reading UFO books.
To cut you off for just a moment, do you remember, was there anything that triggered it that you were aware of, or you just started reading books like this?
I happened to be in an airport, and I just picked up one of those, paperbacks, trade paperbacks, and just, it was...
Continue on.
Oh, I could think of the name of the book. I can't remember now. I'll think in a second. But it was just one of those, and I was fascinated.
Yeah.
I was fascinated. And then I just once I read it, I would pick up another one. And once I read it, I was like, so I read Bud's books. I read Jacques Vallée's trilogy. I read Passport to Magonia. I read Communion. There's a bunch of lesser books in that field. They're like out there by Howard Bloom. And I was I was reading Bud's book, Intruders, that night. It was on my bed. Boy, it was like, and I was alone at the house, and it was wintertime, and I was in Maine, on kind of not really rural, but it was kind of at the edge of rural, and kind of down this road, and there was a forest, and there was like a river behind. So it felt very secluded. And there was a bright light shining through the window, and I sat up on my elbow, and I looked out the window, and there were 5 gray beings, the ubiquitous grays with the big black eyes and the bald heads and the skinny bodies, walking towards the house, and they were backlit by a bright light. And I was the only one home, and there's nobody else in the house, and they were walking towards the house. And I had this feeling that was like no emotion. Like emotions just sucked dry, no emotion. And I heard a voice in my head that said, the voice in my head said, "Oh yes, they're here. now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down. And that's exactly what I did. But it was like, it wasn't my voice. It felt like my voice, like, or a command from the outside. It's very difficult to know. And the next morning, I never even bothered to go outside and look and see if there were footprints in the snow. I dismissed it entirely as nothing at all. It was a dream. I was reading Bud's book. I had that scary imagery embedded in my head. So it feels like a projected. I drew that image later, some years later. It's on my website. It's in the book too. And it was a very strange experience because I knew I had one chance to draw it right, because after I drew it, that image would become my memory, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So I feel like I captured it as best I could. I talk about it in the blog post that I did at the time. It's like, did they have a belt? Did they not have a belt? Well, I can't remember if they had a belt or not. Did they have a belt? It didn't look right when I drew them without a belt. So I gave them a belt, like a little. So I don't know if that means they had a belt or not. So that was like, but that's how it's drawn. But I can't vouch for the belt. I can vouch for that very clearly matches my memory of them approaching the house. And the thing that was backlit behind them was small. It was like the size. If it was a flying saucer, a big flying saucer, that'd be perfect. It wasn't. It was like about the size of a washing machine or something like that, just out in the yard. And then we had a pretty big yard. There was like the landlords grew corn in a big section of the yard. It was wintertime. It was all, under snow. But that was very telling. So can I just do one little detail about this?
Please.
Do you know Terry Lovelace?
Yeah, all too well. Terry's great.
Yeah,
so tremendous respect for him.
So I did a session with Bud in, I think, 2008.
Let's go back just a little bit to how you connected with Bud.
I sent him a letter, and I was working on a documentary at the time, which I almost never bring up anymore. It seems like so long ago, but I was kind of working on a documentary. That's a funny story to tell, that I put a blog post on my thing explaining the documentary and how the genesis of the documentary. I just spoke it into a microphone, so it's an audio post. And that would have been in around 2007, 2008. And I wanted to do a documentary on UFOs, and the fellow's named Steven. You met him, Stephen Dyer. You met him in Laughlin. That's like Laughlin. That was like when the IUFOC was still in Laughlin.
That's right.
And I started going to UFO conferences, and I was like, all of a sudden, I was on fire with this stuff. Like, I was like, I got to figure this out. This is after the initial owl experience and stuff. So, but I remember I convinced this guy, Stephen and his wife, Lisa, were scriptwriters. They had written some Hollywood scripts, and they were living in the little town I was in, this idyllic little ski town. And I convinced them to try to do a documentary on UFO abduction. They had no idea what I was talking about. And I managed to do it. I managed to convince them. And the documentary eventually petered out. But what happened was there was it was just going to be, I was going to kind of be the fact checker. I was going to kind of do the research, and they were going to do the production. And we had met with a cameraman who had worked on, I think he had been one of the cameramen on Jimmy Plays Berkeley. So he's this guy who was living in Jackson Hole, and he was doing documentary film work, and he was kind of semi-retired. He was just looking for small projects to keep him busy. And he was a great guy. Peter was his name. And so we had lunch with Peter. And I had been in this other world. I had dropped out of the film industry. I had done a lot of TV commercials. So I'd been in the kind of film industry. It was TV commercials, and I was at this little bagel shop in Jackson, Wyoming with these two guys, and they were doing the film talk. And I kind of was like, oh, there it is. I haven't been in the film talk in a long time. They're doing it. And then on the drive home with Steven, it was about a 45 minutes drive from the town to the town I was living in. And we were talking, and I kind of said, well, Steven, this might not be interesting to you, but I had a close-up UFO sighting when I was 12. I was so dismissive. It didn't mean anything to me. I was like, I had a close-up UFO sighting when I was 12. And he kind of looked at me like, he did? Yeah, and I had this orange flash in the sky, and I had a missing time event when I was also 12. And he looked at me like, and then I said, oh, in 1993, I saw 5 gray beings with big black eyes walking towards the house, and they were backlit by a big bright light. And I had a voice in my head that said, now is the time to shut down and go to sleep. And he looked at me like, how come you've never told me this before? And he could just see his brain ticking is like, we have a direction for this documentary now. So we attempted a documentary. There's a lot of footage in the can sitting out there. Nothing's ever been done with it. Where I was someone who had never looked into his experiences, and I was going to be looking into my experiences for the first time. And I met with Bud, I met with Leo, I met with Barbara a little bit. I met with Dave Jacobs.
Let's let folks know, in case they're not aware, Leo is the late, great Dr. Leo Sprinkle, who was not just a courageous pioneering psychologist, one of the first people to really dedicate himself to work with experiencers and abductees, and the first mental health professional, the first hypnotic regression that Travis Walton did was with Leo Sprinkle, and Barbara is dear Barbara Lamb, who also uses hypnotic regression, working with people that have had experiences as well. You really work with some of probably the most innovative and some of the most empathetic and intelligent people in the work. That's for sure.
And so that was sort of happening, and that kind of, you know, what happened is I got like Bud tried to hypnotize me and Leo tried to hypnotize me with a camera in the room, and I couldn't go under. And it was like there was this pressure from I want to be careful to say this. They weren't pressuring me. I felt the pressure on myself to I didn't want to perform. I couldn't lie or anything like that. So and then as I was there came a point when I had a conversation with Bud, and it was there was this oh shit moment where this is real. Can I say that? I'm not sure if I can. You can.
Yeah, sure. Fine.
So where basically Bud and I had a conversation, and he said this what you just said, I've heard this many times. What you're telling me, I've heard many times. You know, everything you've said. And I would then say I worry that I'm wasting your time. And then he's like, the fact that you're saying that tells me so much. And so I was just crawling out of my skin at a certain point.
Yeah.
I was very distressed. And then the documentary took on a different flavor, and we didn't make forward progress after that. And then we didn't put that much time into it, but there's a 40 hours of great footage of those folks. Maybe not 40 hours, 20 hours, let's say 20 hours.
When people have a camera on them as opposed to an audio recorder, it can be the difference between night and day. If you want a permanent record, I know for myself, I'd be perfectly happy doing this show just old-fashioned radio, no screen, theater of the mind. But this is what so many people prefer, and we've become such a visual culture. And my feeling is, if you want that experience, don't look at the screen, or basically you can cover your computer screen and listen, or however you want to do it. Mm-hmm. But for some people, that is important. For me, producing the result is what you're after, and cameras can tend to make people feel self-conscious. Other folks, after 2 minutes or so, you just forget it's there and move on. When you had finished the hypnotic regression with Bud, was that at the point where you were going to see Dr. Dave Jacobs, or was that a point
So I only went to interview Dr. Dave Jacobs. I never did hypnosis with him. I did do a hypnosis session with Bud with a camera in the room, and very little came up. What did come up was this. I mentioned Terry Lovelace. This is a very odd little detail, and I'll just so I talked with Terry Lovelace, and it's Terry, this is how it felt. I felt this at the moment. I could have told this at the time, and it was too weird and too embarrassing to say. But when I was under hypnosis, it wasn't a new memory. It was exactly as I remembered it. Basically, I just saw the beings out the window in my mind's eye, and then I put my head on the pillow and shut down, and that was where the memory ended. But when I was talking with Terry, I said, listen, this is what it felt like. And it felt like I had permission under hypnosis to just say exactly how it felt like. So imagine you're a little kid, and every year at Easter time, these aunt and uncles come in one car, and they get out of the car, and let's say in 1 year, as an 11-year-old boy, you can see them out the window, and they get out of the car and they walk towards the house. And then the next year, it's Easter time, you're going to have the same family type event. The car pulls up, it's a year later, the car opens up and they get out of the house. There's that familiarity. So the feeling was, oh, they're back again. Oh, they're here again. And it was so familiar. It was like, oh yeah, that's them. They're back again. So under hypnosis, there was a mood and understanding and internal knowing that this was totally normal and very familiar when I did the session with Bud. And that was, in essence, the only new information I got. And I will say again, it was very difficult to, I feel, fully go under with the
You bring up Terry. Was that in regard to his having a similar memory or experience? Because I've interviewed Terry on the show, and we spent quite a bit of time, well, not as much time as I would have liked, in Arkansas just this past April. But was that what the association was with Terry here?
Well, we were just having a conversation, and we went for a while where we would just call each other up and talk. We haven't done it for a while, but that would just came. There was a point where we would just dial each other up and we would talk. And I think he needed it. And I know I needed it. Yeah. And he was very new to the field, and I had a little bit. I was just a little bit further down the road than he was as far as having been out and talking about my experiences than he was. My book came out a couple of years before his, and so it was just sort of like I didn't know who else to ask. Right. And like, who do you ask about that level of detail? And so he was like, oh man, I know just what you mean. Yeah. That feeling of familiarity. So he has a character named Betty, and he talks about like when he saw Betty, which was seemed like a wig, and he called her Betty because the wig looked like the wig that like Betty Rubble from the Flintstones. And so he had mentioned that in his book, like there was a familiarity when this one character, I think he has a story of just him like hearing a noise downstairs, walking downstairs, and she's sitting in the living room waiting for him. And there was this familiarity. I think I've got that right. That's in his first book. So that was the reason I contacted him. It just came up in conversation, but his understanding of that level of like, it did not feel like that was the first time. It felt like under hypnosis, this had happened many times. That doesn't make it true simply because it felt that, but I'm taking that feeling seriously as far as a possibility.
Do you have any subjective feeling, thinking in terms of your childhood sighting, the missing time episode, and the 5 beings coming toward the house, purely subjective, but they're good, they're bad, I don't know what they are. Some kind of judgment, some kind of opinion on them at those early stages?
None at all. I have no sense of they were good, they were bad. I don't have any bad memories. I do have one very scary memory, but that was just a feeling of being scared in a tent. I was with a friend of mine, Natasha, who you've also met, Natasha from Germany.
Yeah.
And so the event wasn't, it was certainly scary.
Share that with our listeners and viewers.
Okay, so this is, let's jump ahead, 2010. This is 2010. And I had met Natasha at the IUFOC when it was in Laughlin. Oh, this is funny how we met. So she was they have a little Starbucks at the casino. And everyone kind of met there in the morning, and I would get my coffee there. And I remember I got a coffee and I got a bear claw, one of the little pastries, a bear claw pastry. So I got a coffee and a bear claw, and then I had my stuff, I had my book bag, and then there was all the tables were full, and there was this one woman sitting at a very small table, but she had a free chair. And I just wanted to check my email and stuff, and I kind of went up and said, "Is it okay if I sit here?" And I don't think we said much more than that. She nodded, and I sat down. And then we're sitting there, and all of a sudden I'm like drinking the coffee, and and she looks at me. She gives me this look like, and I'm like, "What is it? What happened?" And she looks at me and said, "You ate my bear claw." I did. And then I opened up and I had my own bear claw was in a paper bag, like next to my book bag. And so I was like, oops. And so it was still in the bag, and I handed her my bear claw. And so, but that's how, that was like her first words to me were like, you ate my bear claw.
Interesting way to meet someone.
It was totally adorable way to meet someone. Yeah. So it was like, right. It was if you could script it. So anyway, we became close, and then she came back to the United States, and I was, at that point in my life, I was doing all kinds of outdoor work, and we spent, I think it was over 10 days, like 12 days driving around the Southwest in the Four Corners area, going to national parks, sleeping out under the stars and canyon lands. And so there came a point when we were going to drive back to my house in Idaho, which is a long drive, but it's a beautiful drive through the state of Utah. And the brakes on the car were sort of acting up. The brakes on my car were acting up. And so I pulled into this little town, and the guy at the this is a long story, but to tell it correctly, I have to tell this detail. So we go into this, it's in Cortez, Colorado. Yeah, Cortez, Colorado. So we were in Cortez, Colorado, and I asked somebody on the street, like, hey, is there a mechanic here? And he's like, oh yeah, everyone uses the guy go down the road and turn a corner. It's a tiny little town, cute town. So I pull into this little town mechanic, and he says, okay, bring the car in. And there was smell coming up, and it was heat coming up from the brakes and stuff. And I could tell they were acting funny. And then the mechanic, 15 minutes later, the mechanic comes out, and he's got the oily rag and soap in his hands. And he comes up to me, and he says, well, I can't let you leave town or you'll die. I'm like, oh, okay. Tell me more, So, and then he says, your brakes are failing. And if I let you out right now, I would be liable by the county sheriff. I would be liable if you got into an accident, because they're essentially not working. And I'm like, okay, so what does that mean? So, well, I can fix it, but I won't be able to get the parts for 5 days. So the owner of the shop, helped us find a cheap rental car. He said, listen, I know the lady who does the rental car thing. She's got cars. Don't worry. It's a quiet time of the year here. I'll set you up. So he asked a favor. So we got this cheap rental car. It was great. Like, it just totally had this dream car. We spent 5 days driving around. But that night, we went to, we asked around, is there a place to camp here? And there's like, there's great, what's called primitive camping, just like outside of town. You just pull off the side of the road, and there's wonderful turnouts and stuff like that. There's no fees or anything like that. So we found this great spot to camp. And then we went to bed kind of, I don't know, it wasn't that late. We had pizza that night. And then the next morning, the middle of the night at about, I think I remember looking, it was 11:40. Like, we both woke up screaming. Like, just like boom, 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 like as much adrenaline as it could possibly be going through. I have described it as synthetic fear. Like, it was not just fear. Normal fear has this was just off the charts.
Both of you at the same moment.
Absolutely at the same time. Both of us, she describes it the same way. Just absolute, and I remember just like, what's happening? And I was like, I was like, okay, we can get out of here. We can get out of here. We can get the car. We can drive to a hotel. We can get a motel. We can get out of here right now. We can just leave the tent set up. We can come back tomorrow. And I was just like, and then I'm like, what happened? She said, I saw a face. What does that mean? I saw a face. And she said, do you believe in it's an odd thing. She said, do you believe in evil ghosts? And I had no opinion at all about evil ghosts. So just to deflate the scene, I said no. and which I don't know. I mean, but it was like, I didn't want anything to be scarier. I was like, bring the level of fear down.
Yeah.
So we're like panicking, and I just like, and then we're both asleep. And then I have a memory. I do not think this is how it all worked out, but I have a memory of being in the tent, we're asleep, but I didn't wake up. Right, so I don't know what kind of realm I'm in. It was like not quite a dream. Like, I know what a dream feels like. This didn't feel like a dream. And I'm in the tent, and I have the elevator up filling, and I'm floating up off the sleeping pad. And then I say to myself, I have to remember this. 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 And I look in the corner of the tent by Natasha's, like her feet or her knees, let's say, and floating in the tent is what it was like a size of a pizza pan was a circle, like a translucent circle with a single dot in the middle of it. And I had this thought, this is, to tell this story correctly, I'm going to tell the whole thing. I said, that looks like the thing in my eye. Now that won't mean anything to you. I'll fill you in a second. So that looks like the thing in my eye. So then I'm floating. I'm saying, I have to remember this. I have to remember this. So that turns into me saying, oh, then I pass right through the roof of the tent, just magically, and I'm no longer in this normal realm. I'm in a white realm, like a magical, infinite realm of whiteness.
Self-illuminated.
There's no down. I'm not in a room. So I'm in this white realm. There's nothing but whiteness. It's all my memory is. And then I say, in my voice, I say, am I on a table? 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 And then I hear Natasha's voice with her German accent. She goes, Mike, you're floating. And then whoosh, I'm back in the tent. And I don't think this is, she doesn't remember saying that. I don't think that happened. What I just described, I don't think that happened. That is clearly my memory, but I don't think that's what happened. So, and then we slept soundly, which I usually wake up and drift in and out and wake up. We slept soundly till the next morning. And we get up and there's birds chirping and there's the beautiful Colorado morning and it's just magical. And I wake her up, where I both wake up and I say, what happened last night? And she said, I don't know. Like what happened? And so she said, well, I saw a face. And can you describe the face? And she said, I don't know if I can. I can't describe it. Please, can you describe the face? And she said, you know what it looked like? It looked like that thing in your eye. Now, let me back up. And I said, where was it? And she pointed right to the spot where I had seen the floating pizza pan shape, which so you must, having worked in this, you must be familiar with like how like every story is like connected to another thread, and then you start pulling on one thread, and then you got to tell another story. So in 2008, I think this is right, in 2009, in the spring of 2000, the fall of 2009, in October of 2009, I was in Pasadena, California. I was visiting a friend. I was just driving around, and there was nobody at the house, so they weren't going to be back at the house for a while. So I was just like, I'll just like take a nap in this park. So I was in this pretty park in Pasadena, and you know the feeling you get when you lay out in the sun and you close your eyes slightly, and your eyes, and you could just get the twinkle through your eyes, that little filter. It was in my eye was the shape of a gray alien seated like a Buddha, and no one in the world could see it but me. So I drew it and put it on my blog. And so it's this image of like a seated Buddha. It's like this little, I had a cataract in my right eye, and it was within that shape of the cataract. It was as clear as a bell if I squinted my eyes, and I could look into a light and squint, and that would show up in my eye. So when she said, it looked like the thing in your eye, it didn't look anything. What I saw looked like was just a circle. I saw it as the same thing she saw. So, and then when we got up that morning, I had a big scratch across my chest, which had not been there the day before. And then what happened later on that evening, later on that night, we had a shamanic ritual at a sweat lodge on the Navajo reservation. So to tell the story properly, it begins with a guy saying, you can't leave town or you'll die, and it ends with like a beautiful ritual in the landscape of the Navajo people that was a death and rebirth event. So I can't tell it without telling we get trapped in that little town. This event happens, and then it culminates in this beautiful ceremony. So that was a long story. You asked one simple question and went on and on and on.
Well, that's great. It's one of the things about doing this show that we have the luxury of following on. Often our time is less, or we want guests to be more concise. I really like this format a lot. And it's as good a place to take our on-the-hour break. We will be back in 4 minutes. This is Peter Robbins with my special guest, Mike Clelland. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. See you in 4.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
It's not just a donation.
It's a warm blanket.
It's a bottle of clean water.
It's a roof and a bed.
It's knowing someone cares.
It's feeling safe.
It's a today that's better than yesterday.
Every dollar you can spare helps so much more than you can imagine. Please, donate now to help people affected by Hurricane Ian. Your support is urgently needed.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
And we are back with Mike Clelland and myself, Peter Robbins, on Meanwhile Here on Earth. And Mike, as we move into the beginning of our second hour, let's pick up on where the owl story enters into your story. What was the beginning of what has become the focus of your major work and what you're best known for in the field? How did that start?
In 2006, which was before I started looking into any of this stuff, like 2006, I had not looked into a thing. At the same time, I had been reading somewhat compulsively UFO literature for over a decade. So I was well primed to look at my own life experiences and kind of say oh, I sure know what those imply. missing time. And so it was this autumn of 2006. I would have been 44 years old. I lived in this beautiful, idyllic town of Driggs, Idaho, and I had been working in Alaska all summer. So I had been outside, living in the mountains all summer long up in Alaska. And then I got back down to the lower 48 and back down to my town, and I met this young woman who had been living in town, and she was working for the same school I worked for. They have a branch in that town, and she was doing what's called in-town work. We were helping with the gear and stuff like that. So I got in a conversation with her. Her name is Kristen, and I said, wow, you must have been out camping all summer long. You were here all summer. It's October now. I think it would have been late September. That's probably a little more accurate. Late September. And I said, yeah, wow, you've been camping all summer, I bet, huh? And she went, I haven't camped once. I'm like, that's terrible. I'll take you camping. So it was essentially a first date, and in kind of this outdoor culture that's very normal, So we went out for one night with very light packs. It was beautiful weather, so we had no issues at all. We were going to just sleep out under the stars, and we left in the afternoon, and you walk for a few hours. And from where I was living, in a few hours, you can be deep, deep, deep into the mountains. And we were sitting on a big flat rock as the sun was setting, and 3 owls passed right above us, and they flew around us for the next 2 hours as the sun set. And then when we actually lay down to go to sleep, you'd be on your back looking straight up at the sky. This is glorious. This is far northern latitude, Rocky Mountains, and high elevation, just trillions of stars. And so on your back, the sky would be blotted out whoosh, for just a half a second when these owls would fly right in front of our faces. And then the next morning, it was like, wow, that was really cool, the owls and stuff like that. And I said, hey, if that was fun. We just walked out the next morning. We were back in town well before lunchtime. And then I said, yeah, let's do this some other time. This was fun. And she said, great. And then, so we went to a different part of the mountains 4 days later for one night. And then at sunset, it was a little colder the second trip. So I said, let's walk up to that hilltop. And I brought a tent this time. The weather was a little more unsettled. So let's walk up to that hilltop to warm up. Just so we walk up to the hilltop, we'll warm up, we'll walk back down it just as it's getting dark, and then we'll be a little warmer in the tent, as opposed to just climbing in the tent when you're a little chilled. So she was great. So we walked up to the hill, and as we got to the hill, the sun set, and 3 owls flew around us. Now, before they had been sort of far away. This time they were like right up close to us. And I have such a clear memory of this one owl standing right at our feet. And I said, and this is something I talk about now. I did not talk about it then, but I had a voice in my head as we were seeing those owls, those real owls. And the voice said, this has something to do with the UFOs. There's no UFOs in the story, except for the voice in my head. And so afterwards, we were both of us recognized that, like, to have it happen once was pretty cool. To have it happen twice was mystical to the point of, like, kind of being scary. And we started searching out and researching owls and what the totem meaning of owls, what the spiritual meaning of owls, what it might mean. What does this mean? And we were both, but I had the extra, like, I started asking why, like, I started my own UFO experience because of these owls. The voice in my head said, well,
Mike, your sound has gone out, Mike.
My own UFO experiences, talk to
Mike,
UFO
can you hear me?
And
Mike,
lost.
Can you hear me? Your sound has just dropped out for the last minute or so. We're not hearing you. Chanel, is this something from our side that we can correct? Okay, Mike is going to exit and return. This only happens on live radio, folks. You don't get this excitement in podcasts. It's all edited out. Mike and I met about a bit more than 15 years ago when he started working with Bud Hopkins. And we had, I think, one case where owls had come up. I'm going to ask Mike about that when he returns. But it's extraordinary in this field of study how we can re-trigger. And you are back? And can you hear me?
I can. You sound great. I hear you. Yes.
And you sound great too. Can you take this back again to well, you don't know when you faded out.
Oh, I pretty much know right when I faded out.
Okay.
So sorry about that. You disappeared, and I kind of kept talking. I was hoping. So did we get to the second set of owls?
Yes.
We got to the second set of owls. Okay. So what happened was afterwards, two things happened, right? So there's this crazy impulse to research owls because it felt like something powerful had happened.
And the same impulse was also something that Christine experienced.
In her own way, yes. So she kind of went down a different path and was very. So yes. So Kristen was looking in her own. But the UFO stuff didn't mean anything to her. Like that was. But she had a lot of synchronicities in her life, and so she also a very spiritual person. So, and then so I was looking into the owl issues through totem animals and stuff. And then I was also looking into the UFO stuff. I started looking into my own UFO experiences. I reached out to Leo, and I started reaching out to people and other researchers in MUFON. And so Leo would introduce me to people, said, call this person. This would be a good person for you to call. And I would talk to him. And so I met a lot of people. And I would ask everyone the same question. I would say, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And I was shocked and how many people said, no one has ever asked me that. I have the weirdest stories, one weird story about owls with an owl in it. And I started to take this seriously. I started to collect these stories and I started to archive them and I started a blog. And within the blog, I put right on the top of my blog, I want to hear your owl stories very early on. And it did not take long before if you Googled UFOs, owls, I was the first thing that came up. So anyone anywhere in the world who had a UFO and an owl experience would find me in about 2 mouse clicks. And if they were curious about it. So I took this research very seriously. And this is something that I'm very open with. But this between about 2006, when I had the experience with Kristen, to about 2013, when I had an experience that basically cemented it, like this is real. And I was just full of doubt in those years, 2006 to 2007, I spent 95% of my waking hours wondering if I had gone insane. And it was just like that in my head, just this can't be happening. This cannot be happening. It's impossible. Why you? It can't be, or why me is what it was saying. Why this can't be happening? And it just droned on and on and on. And so it was a tough time. And we interacted in those years. And it was a tough time. So you have worked with Bud and working with whose experiences must recognize that. And I'm at a point now where I recognize that in other people that out to me. And I don't pretend to be a psychologist or a clinician or anyone with any expertise, but I can listen to people's stories and tell them, like, you are not alone.
Mike, to jump in here for a moment, you're familiar with the term confirmation bias?
Or confirmation anxiety?
Essentially, it's, I now believe this, so to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I'm focusing on these things, and for folks who may have just tuned in or are not familiar with your work, confirmation bias. Can you give us a couple of examples of things that have come to you from completely different directions or have happened to you beyond this, and not, the one that confirmed it all for you in 2013?
You're garbling up a little bit.
Oh, can you give us some examples of some of these owl accounts that for you, whether they happen to you or somebody whose account you take very seriously, made it all the more real, that it constitutes evidence on a certain way of understanding that word?
Okay, so here's a simple one. So this is one of the very first ones I got. A friend of mine contacts me. He's camping he's become a close friend of mine, but he reached out to me. One of the very first people to reach out to me. He's camping in Arizona with a friend, and they're out under the night sky in the desert, and they're just talking and looking at the stars. And then they notice an owl at the top of a cactus looking down at them. And it gives them a strange, eerie feeling. And the owl flies off, and then moments later, a triangle UFO flies by. Goes right over them, and this fellow, Derek, struggled to try to describe how eerie the flight pattern of this craft was, this triangle craft. He said it was very low, totally silent, moved very strangely where it hugged the terrain in this very eerie, unsettling way, and flew right over them and down the canyon in just a minute before they had been looking at an owl. I have got that story in one form or another, good God, many, 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 many times where an owl shows up in the context of direct UFO contact. Or let's say that was a UFO sighting. But and so there's two aspects of this. One is the screen memory aspect, and one is the real owl. Once you've heard the screen memory story 500 times, you kind of get it. And what I'm more fascinated with now is the accounts of real owls showing up at the time of contact. And so yeah, like I've got a lot of stories like that, it's very similar to Derek's, where you would see an owl, and it very often comes with an owl first and then a UFO, not the other way around.
Do you remember the first time you spoke to Bud Hopkins about this phenomena?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And I brought up the owls. I said, I had this weird experience. I told him exactly the story I just told you with Kristen. So that would have been 2007 or 8. So that would have been just a year or so before. And I was very, I was on edge. I was on edge when I met Bud. That was that chapter when I was worried I was going insane.
Oh.
And he just kind of, he was very grounding. He was just like, okay, that's the owl story. Okay, just don't worry too much about that. Let's just one thing at a time. And so, I think he suspected strongly that there were UFO contact events around that issue with Kristen and I. I do not think there were. I think those were real owls. There's no way to, I guess I could go through hypnotic regression and see if there's anything there. Hypnotic regression is its own, ball of wax where there's some, it's hard to me, that's regression is not conclusive information. It's information for sure, yes. But I'm very cautious to treat it as conclusive information. So, but that's the stories. And I've got hundreds of stories of owls and UFOs.
And these stories come not just from the Northwest or the United States, but around the world.
Yeah, all over the world. People from Russia, people from Cyprus, people from Finland, people from Canada, people from England. Yeah, Scotland. Wow, I've got them from all over the world. Yeah.
At this point, looking back at it and looking straight at it as sort of the ground zero center of this area of study, have you been able to reach any kind of conclusions, for lack of a better word, or it's not something you can draw conclusions around, do you feel?
I can speculate, and I can speculate from an informed position, but
yes, you can.
The conclusion is anybody's guess. So the source of the owls, right? So you can we don't know the source of the UFOs, right? Are they from another planet? Are they from another realm? Are they from our own unconscious? So why are the owls connected to it? So here's one thing I feel very strongly with now. Owls are also connected with other highly charged human experiences, right? So seeing a flying saucer, seeing a UFO, seeing a triangle craft is a highly charged human experience. And there are other highly charged human experiences. Meditation. These are the ones I'm finding. This is where I'm finding the patterns. Meditation, psychedelics, most often mushrooms. And so I understand, like, some researchers will say, he's like talking to people taking mushrooms and taking this, and like, yes, I am. I'm talking to people who take mushrooms and they have the owl experiences. That's what I'm looking for, the owl experience. People who go through shamanic initiation see owls. This is well understood in the cultures, the shamanic cultures, in the community of shamans. Well understood. When you go through a shamanic initiation, you see owls. And then death would be the other one. So when somebody, this is what I'm getting in I could do a beautiful big fat book on owls and death. And it's a very heartwarming stories, mostly where it's usually a parent. This is the story I'm getting. Okay, here, I'll just tell you one. This is a quick one. Guy walks, his dad dies of a heart attack, massive heart attack. He's in the hospital. His dad has died. He leaves the hospital. The doors open up. And he's on the little sidewalk right where just like a few feet from the doors of the hospital. And in the grass next to the sidewalk is an owl looking up at him. And he looks at the owl and he says, "Dad, I love you. You were a great father. I'm so honored to have known you. Thank you for everything you did. I appreciate it more than you'll ever know." And I have that story over and over and over and over and over. In ways that are so beautiful. So here's another story. This is
and so unconnected.
And people don't know each other. And exactly. I'm convinced now. Here, let me tell you one story. This happened to me. I don't know if so. My mother died in 2012, and I was holding her hand on one side of the bed, and my sister was holding her hand on the other side of the bed. She had been suffering terribly from Alzheimer's. She had an aneurysm, and 4 days later, she passed gently away. Okay. And it was her last couple of years were terribly sad. So it was a beautiful experience to have that life experience, experience, to be have that connection with my mother.
Been there,
and so. That was like at 3 a.m. And my mother was living in an assisted living facility near my sister outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Excuse me, outside of Charlotte. Mm-hmm. And my brother was not in the room when it happened. So me, my brother and sister had to plan all the things. So like to try to sleep that next day, none of us could sleep. We were trying to what's involved in the funeral, what's involved in the obituary, what's involved in dealing with the family. And so as the sun was setting, we took a big sigh of relief and we went out onto my sister's Jeannie, my brother's Jim. I'm the baby. I was on a couch, kind of a little wicker couch in their back porch, very southern environment. And Jeannie's best friend was sitting across from us. Now, my brother and sister knew I had been doing owl research. I was getting emails every morning. I would read them to my sister. I was there for a bunch of days in a row. And I would read these letters to my sister. Here's what's going on with my brother. Didn't like it. He was not comfortable with it. And so I never pushed it. My sister was curious and she didn't know what to make of it. Yeah. So I'm sitting on the couch. My sister's dear friend, Ruthie, who lived right across the street, was sitting across from us. And we all got a glass of wine and just decompressing from what had been an emotional day. And Ruthie says, "Jim, Jean, Mike, I know there is an afterlife. I know." And Ruthie is this beautiful, heartfelt, radiant being. Like if you want a witness that is unquestionably telling the truth, it's my sister's best friend, Ruthie. She says, "I know there is an afterlife. And I know because of an experience with an owl." Oh my gosh, my sister did the thing where she was like, no, owl. And my brother looked at me and he gave me this look like, "You put her up to this. Oh. Something, what did you do? You did something." And I'm like, and Ruthie, poor Ruthie, I could see her face like, "What did I do?" And so I said, "Ruthie, you don't know it, but I've been doing research on owls and their mystical connection to things like death and UFO experiences and big powerful events. And so just let me say, like, I want to hear your story. So she says, my father died. After my father died, I was having a terrible time with grief. And so part of my grieving process was to walk this nature trail that went around the neighborhood. I walked the dog. I walked my sister's dog around that nature trail. So, and she said, every day I would pass an owl on a branch. And then one day I was approaching the branch with the owl, and the owl hooted at me. And I looked up at the owl, and I thought, owls shouldn't be out in the daytime. And I looked up at this owl, and I said, are you my daddy? And she said, every bit of the grief faded away, and I had this mystical, unquestioning knowing that my dad was fine. And he was telling me that he was fine. He was telling me through this owl. And she said, after that, my grieving was gone. So that is the story that shows up with remarkable consistency in my research as far as owls and death. Doesn't have anything to do with UFOs. It has everything to do with the highly charged human experience, of which, so the owl is at the center, and then there's all these little spokes coming in, and these are highly charged events that people can have in their lives.
Yes.
One is UFO contact. So I think that the owl is not the totem of the UFO experience. The owl is the totem of the highly charged human event. So that is a better way to frame it. People say, oh my gosh, I saw like an owl. Does that mean I'm abducted by aliens? I'm like, no, it doesn't. It's like, you should take that seriously in a mythic way, but it don't jump to the UFO thing, because that's been at the forefront of my research, but there's lots more to these stories.
Let's shift gears here a bit and talk about the novel that you have written. I have never written nonfiction, although a lot of people wish some of the work that I had written was fiction. I've never written fiction. And to the best, did you write any fiction before you decided to write a novel?
Nothing. So the book started out as a comic book. I wanted to do a comic book. I was a professional illustrator. I have a comic book kind of style. I had an idea. Oh, I'm going to do a comic book. And so
graphic novel.
A graphic novel. That's the more grown-up way to say it. But like I'm like, there's the teenager in me, like can't make that leap. It was going to be a comic book. So it would have been a graphic novel, obviously. But I had an idea, and I did some illustrations, and I did some roughs. Those are all online and stuff like that. I put that out there. And this would have been around 2010, 11. That's like 12 years ago, a dozen years ago. So I did some sketches. I wrote a big treatment out. I really worked on the treatment, and the treatment was, and then I put it like a friend of mine worked in the comic book industry and said, you don't want to do a comic book alone. You got to be part of a team. You want an illustrator. You want to have someone do the inking, someone do the penciling, someone do the colors, someone do the lettering. You'll kill yourself with trying to do it all alone. Yeah. So I was like, oh, and I put it on a shelf. In 2019, I took it off the shelf, and it was in my computer. It wasn't on a shelf, but metaphorically off a shelf. And I read the treatment, and I was like, this is pretty good. Wow, this is good. I like this. I like this story.
And you could do it by yourself. And
I could do it all alone. And I had already written 3 books at that point.
Yep.
And I said, okay, I'm gonna make this happen. And I kind of tinkered with it. It never felt right. I was tinker with it, and I'd make a little thing here, and I'd make some notes here, and I'd rework a chapter there, and I'd add a little bit there, and I'd make some, and it never. And then I looked at it, and I was like, ooh, I crossed the line. Like I did too much not to finish it. And then COVID happened, and I was like, frick, I'm locked up. I'm doing it. I'm doing it. And I never trusted it. I read it aloud. I read some parts aloud to a friend over the phone, and she cried. And I was like, I cried too, actually. So to be fair, we read one chapter. It wasn't even one of the core chapters of the book. It was just a peripheral little thing, and we both cried. And I was like,
and neither one of you were crying because it was like, oh, please stop reading because this is.
Oh no, it wasn't. Yeah, it was very. So it was. So I was like, I got it. Okay, this is a real book. And I never treated it as a real book until that point. And then it was like, I got to take it really seriously. Yeah. And so I worked, and so it was was it hard. wow, was it hard. And like, it was like I had to let go, like just let go. Like, I mean, it's nonfiction is easy, right? You talk to someone, you transcribe them over the phone, you got the transcription, you can button up the transcription, you can make a few comments, and then, you know, like, okay, and then you can summarize the chapter. And none of that. Boy, talk about the blank page. Whew, it was hard. It is good. Oh, go ahead.
Tell us as much as you can about the book without us walking away from what you're about to say, saying, I don't need to buy that or read that.
I'm not going to spoil. I won't spoil anything. I know enough not to spoil it. So the past 15 years, I get one good story a day. I got 5 stories yesterday. I got 5 owl and UFO stories yesterday in my email inbox. That's a big day. Like, I know something's like, I can't respond to anyone. I have to apologize. I ask for your stories. I archive them. I read them all. I wish I could get back to every single person. I do my very, very best, and it's so hard. So when I talk to these people, I have typed it 1,000 times. People will tell me their story, and oftentimes I've heard not exactly the story, but I can say, I have heard a story. I haven't heard your story exactly, but I have heard many stories with the same flavor and mood. And there is this eerie quality to these stories. And I wanted to embed that eerie quality into the fiction book. So the story is basically an artist who, more than a little bit, it's me. I went through comic, here's one thing. I use that, like, my fallback, my reflex was the comic book. Like, I was like, this, I'm giving myself permission to go for it. You know, comic book has a logic where you can go for it in the themes and the boldness of it. Literature, you want to be a little more stoic and stuff like that. I wasn't stoic at all. I went for it. And so it's a story of an artist who has a sort of, he's struggling with memories in his past, and he has a sort of life crisis, and he does a kind of walkabout in the desert. And in the desert, he has these kind of mystical experiences, and he turns his back on his old life and ends up in this little town. And then while in that little town, he realizes that he has been led to this town, and within that little town, there's a cast of characters that there's some spies, there's some mystery. There's a very profound mystery that's set up. Basically, like, why am I in this town? And there's a little romance in there. There's a lot of mystery, and it plays out like kind of an action thriller. Well, not really an action, but a thriller, and also a detective novel. So the first quarter of the novel is this person's internal drama while he's walking alone in the desert. The next 3 quarters of the novel is a detective novel. I read a lot of Raymond Chandler, so it's like, too. I felt bad. That was my it's a detective novel where he is trying to solve the mystery. The mystery is himself. Why am I in this town? So, and the reviews have been. I'm absolutely humbled at the reviews on Amazon. It's been out 2 months and 1 day as of today. So here. Oh, I should probably a good idea. Here's the book. It's called The Unseen, and the cover of the book, I very much wanted it to feel like a comic book, and so it was a huge departure for me to go this. There are owls in it. I will say that. Oh, one more thing. It's a UFO book. Like, basically, he's having UFO experiences. I never used the word UFO once in the book. I was that was like a challenge for me, never to use the word UFO.
Also, for such a simple illustration, it's very powerful. It sits well on the cover, and it has a very deep figure ground because of the treatment of the figure walking away from us, in a real depth of field. And I can't wait to read it. Our mutual friend Lauren Cutts, who is outside of the UFO work, he's a railroad man, and although he's very knowledgeable on the subject of UFOs
and owls,
absolutely thought it was terrific. And that's somebody whose opinion I respect. You've also reminded me in the same manner that the title of Bud's first book, Missing Time, became part of the English language, which is an extraordinary thing to have happen for a writer. And I'm now thinking we may come to a time when somebody says, I had a 5-owl day.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I've caught it where people are like, we'll talk about owls in the UFO contact experience, and it's somewhat accepted within the lore now that there is this mythic quality to it, as opposed to the screen memory quality to the owls.
Yes.
There's sort of a mythic quality to these owl sightings that show up in the context of these experiences.
When you say screen memory quality, let me qualify that a bit. I remember in working with Bud, and I think it was somewhere in the 80s, where an owl came into the story, a particularly large white one, standing on the window ledge of the room of an experiencer. And it's just one more fact or bit of data. And I think in the field of UFO studies, oftentimes researchers, investigators, writers really look for the exotic as opposed to the everyday. And our minds are such extraordinarily complex things, and they help to protect us in many respects. I know for myself, even after all of my decades in this work, if tonight, for the very first time in my life, I woke up and there was a glow coming under the door, and I wasn't able to move, and there were figures at the end of the bed of a certain kind of physical profile, I don't think I would find myself saying, well, I know what this is all about. I think I would freak out and walk away from this work possibly in a very shaken state. And that screen memory of something that isn't what you're actually seeing, and not necessarily what the power of these other intelligences are putting in your head, but your mind itself protecting you. You're looking at, for example, an archetypical gray, and something in there is saying, I'm not ready for this, or I can't handle this, or I am completely on overload right now, so I think I'll see something else. And maybe at some point in the future when I'm ready, this memory will fall away, whether they put it there or I put it there. Is that something that you can easily discern, sort of a second sense at this point, or that you're not sure in some cases which type of owl it is, so to say?
Well, when someone says they saw a 4-foot owl in the road, 4.5-foot tall owl in the road, and there's no such thing as a 4.5-foot tall owl. That's too big to be a real owl. And then I can assume that it's some sort of screen memory. Yeah. And if it's accompanied by a missing time I'm the screen memory aspect of it. Here's the story. This story was told to me by a close friend, and she had been having contact. She worked with Bud. She had been having contact experiences from a very young age. And basically she always thought they happened at night. She just assumed these are nighttime events. She was working at a summer camp for girls, and this would have been in Oregon. And so she was in the forest, and there was this one campsite in one part of the forest, and there was another campsite not too far away, but just where the flat spots where you had to walk on a trail that connected the two. It was close. You could actually... So she was walking away from one campsite and walking to the other, full daylight, alone. She'd hear the kids behind her, the girls behind her at the one campsite, and she turns a corner on the trail, and there's a gray alien standing on the side of the trail. And she says, and she was shocked because she had seen them before in fleeting little glimpses in her home, in her bedroom. And she was like, I'd only ever seen him at night. So she was like, stopped on the trail. And she said that she looked at it and it looked at her. And she basically, there was like this telepathic communication, and the thing, her impression was that the thing did not expect her to see it. And she heard this voice in her brain, like this telepathic reverberation. Says she's very skilled at I'm telling her story for her, but she says, when you're in that telepathic communication, like you're feeling its thoughts, it is feeling your thoughts. So there's this kind of echo, almost this echo chamber event in communication. And she said she looked at this thing and she heard it go owl, 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 owl. And she watched this gray alien morph into an owl and turn around and walk into the woods.
I've never heard of an account like that.
I have one other account in my files, which there was a woman and she had had contact experiences. She's at her house and there's a bright flash outside in the front of the yard. She said, what is that bright flash? So she opens the door and she stands on the porch. She looks around. There's nothing in the yard. And then she looks right next to the porch, right next to her. And there are 4, I think it's maybe, I can't remember the exact number, 3 beings, gray aliens looking at her. And she looks at the 3 grays. The 3 grays look at her and they turn into 3 deer. And they walked backwards and around the corner. So 3 deer walked backwards and around the corner. And I've heard another person who has a story of a cat. Like basically, like in the kitchen, they turn around, there's a gray alien, and the gray alien goes, whoop, and just turns into a cat. But it was like a cat the size of a gray alien, like a 4.5 foot tall cat. So there's this like the psychic projection is like, oh, you caught us, oops. And so somehow that's I'm of the opinion that it's less a defense mechanism. Screen memory is a Freudian term for the defense mechanism of hiding like what would be buried trauma in your youth.
Of course.
And then, but in the UFO context, I feel, it doesn't make me right, but this is what's coming through my research, is I feel that the screen memory aspect is somehow projected from the being into the mind of the observer. John Carpenter has reports in his files where people will basically, at the end of a contact event, the gray alien under hypnosis is coming out. Again, it's a little bit murky. It's hard to know what's true. But under hypnosis, the being will say, you will remember us as an owl. And so, go on.
And you are, of course, referring to John Carpenter, the mental health professional, and not the famous film director.
Not the guy who directed The Thing, yeah. So or Escape from New York.
Continuing on. You really are a marvelous artist and illustrator. You have an economy of line, a whimsical sense of portraying events between people, and a way of using your particular style to educate. For me, especially when I was younger in my 20s and traveled to places on my own and took risks that were just stupid, to go right to the right word. But I was addicted to it for a while, and I had no adult supervision for about a year. And when you're roaming around Afghanistan or Nepal, and you're willing to try anything, you can get into situations. But the thought of wilderness survival, of literally living off the land, of serious mountain climbing, that's a whole nother level of the game. Can I ask you a bit about how you not only became involved in these very serious skills, but how it kind of transmorphed into wanting to communicate your enthusiasm and educate other people around it? Again, this has nothing to do with the paranormal, unless on a certain level, standing thousands of feet up, separated civilization by miles and miles, and if you break your ankle, the wolves will eat you. How did this really take hold with you? Because it's definitely a non-standard way of making a living.
Well, I lived in a funny little town. The town of Driggs, Idaho has a bunch of people that work for the school. I used to not use the name of the school. I don't care anymore because you could Google my name and find out in 2 seconds the school. But the school is the National Outdoor Leadership School, and I worked for them for 17 years, and then I worked for some guide services for the next 8 or 9 years. So there's about 25 years of my life that was. It's very few people do this full time, but I was working extensively for about 25 years doing this work. I took a course at Knowles when I was like in my 20s, and then I was like, oh my God, that was the coolest thing ever. And then I started doing the stuff on my own. So the courses are 30 days long.
Oof.
So I would go out for 30 days. The bus would drop us off. So usually a team of instructors, usually 3 or 4 instructors, and the total team number would be around 12 to 15. 15 would be a big group. 12 would be about normal. So, and you would go out for 30 days. You would walk away from the bus. Now it's very difficult so you said survival, you're living off the land. And you don't really live off the land. You don't carry your own water, but you're like, it's pretty tough to go into the mountains of Wyoming or British Columbia and live off the land. You might be able to get a little wild onion. You can maybe make a little mint tea, but beyond that, wow, unless you're killing a moose, you're carrying that stuff on your back to eat the food. So you can only carry about 10 days of food at a time. After that, it gets prohibitively heavy. So a 30-day trip, you would get the groceries delivered twice. And so I've had them delivered by boats in a lake in Yellowstone. I've had helicopters in British Columbia. I've had lots of horse packers come in and throughout the Rockies, and airplanes in the glaciers of Alaska would deliver the food. So that's how you would. So it's not wilderness survival in that sense. You were eating pretty well. We were like, food was critical to the whole experience. So you're eating well, and I got to be a really good backcountry cook. But the trips were designed. What happens is it's a small team, 12 to 15 people. You see no one. You see no one else. So what was joyous about the situation, you were in a primitive wilderness area, and there's all kinds of, we teach safety and we teach map reading and we taught group dynamics and team behavior and stuff like that. So, but the way I would describe it, because I was leading these trips for most of the time that I was working there, after a certain apprenticeship, you were just put into the role of course leader. And so 30-day trip, I was in charge. What I was most focused on was building a community within this small team. So it wasn't like people weren't just following the leaders. No. Everyone was given a leadership opportunities. That was the L in the school, a National Outdoor Leadership School. So the leadership aspect. And leadership is like, it's teamwork. And there's obviously decisions that the students couldn't make. But wow, I worked on Denali one time, so that was a 35-day course. So most of that time was on glacier. So 35 days on glacier. We hauled our own food, so we had what's called, you do ferries, you'd ferry the food. So that was an outrageously powerful event. So this is really funny. That doesn't mean anything to the people who've worked there, because after you do it a bunch of times. So I was working 2 30-day trips a summer. So that's 60 days out. That's like June and July. It's like basically at the end of May, you go into the woods, you come out of the woods in September 1st. It was great. It was great. Actually, it would have been August. Yeah, August 1st. So 60 days in the mountains. And then you would come back and you'd have one shower, and then you go right back in the field. So I had one shower in 60 days. That's my record. And people hear these stories and they think of like a brutal challenge and persevering and overcoming. It's nothing like that. It is smiles. It is laughing. It is becoming close to the people on the team in ways you never are close in the front country. So the front country is where we are now, and the back country is where we would do the trips. The joy and the power and the supportive environment that I worked so hard to create was just electric. There's some times when things go wrong and you have to deal with interpersonal conflicts in the field and stuff like that. But for the majority of it, it was wildly life affirming and so beautiful. So you go out for 30 days in the Rocky Mountains. You see the snow, the winter snow recede. You see wildflowers coming up. You see the wildflowers blooming to their full potential. And by the time 30 days are up, those so you go through a field of wildflower on day 2. They're just little things. By day 29, those wildflowers are bleached in the sun, being replaced by a new crop of wildflowers that you're seeing. You get so in tune with the smells and where water is and the sound of running water and the what it means if you're cold, tired, and hungry and have a tent mate say, "Here, I just made you a cup of hot chocolate. Enjoy." So it was incredibly powerful in the most life-affirming, rewarding ways.
How wonderful. A question. Did there ever come a time when you had to deal with a genuine physical emergency, one that might have even been, can you give us some examples of that? Because that, I think, is something, the way our minds work is, what's the worst case scenario here? Snake bite, 30 miles from civilization, and what do you have to deal with it? And can you give us some examples of dealing with crisis situations?
Look at a map, the Wrangell-St. Elias mountain range in Alaska. It is about as remote as any place in North America. You'd have to go to Antarctica or Greenland, I think, to get to any place more remote than that. So it's, and we were crossing the range. That was freaking bold, man. That was bold. Like, to start at one side of the range, and this is all mostly glacier travel. You ascend, there's a ridge on the range, and you go down, you go up the glaciers on one side, you come down the glaciers on the other. We're going to exit that side. So we got to the apex of the trip in a storm. Like, this is the highest point. We were behind schedule. We were low on food, all kinds of stuff. Tons of drama on this trip. Actually, I told this story in its completion on a podcast called Hot Drinks, and it's hosted by Sean Stratton. And the podcast is called Hot Drinks. I think you could Google Hot Drinks podcast, Mike Clelland, and it would come right up. So, and I told this story. So a young woman from Belgium was dealing with GI issues. She was, I think she was 17 years old, and she was vomiting blood and had bloody diarrhea in about the most remote place that you can be without going to Antarctica.
And you have no physical contact with the outside world.
We had a satellite phone.
Okay.
And we had what's called a line of sight marine band radio. So if overflying aircraft, we could communicate with the marine band radio, and we had a satellite phone that we could communicate to the branch. So it only had one number we could call. We could call, if we picked up, it was like the red line in the White House. Like, you call that number, boy, like they answer the phone at the other end, and we say, okay, we have a medical emergency. We were all the instructors have advanced medical training, so we could not diagnose the issue in the field. Sure. So in the middle of a storm, there was close to 48 hours of just like dealing with the storms. The Air Force is flying helicopters above us. We could talk to the helicopters. We could not see them in the whiteout conditions in the storm. Eventually, we had. She got evacuated on a helicopter, and so we were part of a team that moved her down to a lower elevation, and so the helicopters. Anyway, that was a long, involved story, and it was. So here's what happened: the team was amazing. 16-year-old, 17-year-old kids, young adults, let's say young adults, college age young adults, were amazing. They rose to so you're in this situation where you're remote. Yes, the I-team, and I was very clear. I kept everyone updated on every possible thing I could, so the entire team knew about this. And then we'd be in the middle of doing something, and a student would come up, and they would hand you a bowl of macaroni and cheese. Say, here's some food. And you're like, thank you. Let me eat this food. And just that kind of thing, like the issues of, we need to. I'm just trying to think of some. So the teamwork was remarkable. So she ended up being fine. So I did cartoons for Climbing Magazine, like instructional cartoons for Climbing Magazine, and I have very nice handwriting. So I would do these instructional cartoons, how to tie knots and these drawings. So I had her handwrite all the notes, all the medical notes. We kept track of her respirations, her pulse, or what food she'd been eating, what time all this is happening. So we could give that to the Air Force. They put her on the helicopter. They flew her to the Anchorage hospital, and then we could deal with that. So I wrote the notes. Someone at the hospital was a climber, and they looked at the notes and they said, "Did Mike Clelland write this?" So
that's kind of a compliment, to put it mildly.
Well, it was a compliment to my handwriting, but so.
Mike, we have about 4 or 5 minutes left. Again, I want to remind our viewers and listeners that your website is mikeclelland.com, and that's Clelland. Any parting thoughts with the minutes that we have left, my friend?
Sure, I will tell one story. This is a story I can tell very quickly, and it has no UFOs in it. It
Works
has
for
an
me.
owl in it, and it is so a woman contacted me. She was a grandmother. She was a happy grandmother, but she told a story about in her youth she was terribly depressed. So I went back and forth and talked with her, but she told a story where she said, basically, I don't tell this story to people. She was going to kill herself. She was in her parents' car. She had a hose that could lead in the car with her, and she had a pillow. She was going to take the hose from the tailpipe into the car and then lay her head on and then a head on a pillow so she could lie down in the back seat. And she had a spot all picked out. And she was 16 years old, and she's driving to the spot. And it's a turnout in the woods, and she slows down to make the turn into the spot, and an owl flies right up to the windshield. The car's almost stopped. The owl flies right up to the windshield. They lock eyes on each other, and the owl flies off. And she said, this was a sign. And she turns around and came home, and she's still here. She said she felt she was told, this will pass. You can live your life. That story has no UFOs in it. It has everything about the owl research I've been doing embedded in that short little story.
What's next for you? Well, I'll tell you, say to a degree, what's next is at the end of August, you and I and a cadre of colleagues, and I know a fascinating audience, will all be meeting up in Cincinnati for the MUFON symposium, the International Symposium, which takes place in another American city each year. What is your subject of your talk going to be, dare I ask?
You can guess. It's going to be owls and UFOs. So I will tell this. You know what? I've been working on the talk, and I'm going to talk less about my own experiences and more about my research. I find that audiences really like my talking about my own experiences, but what happens is just the time limitations to tell my own story correctly.
Yeah.
I either got to do one or the other. If I try to do both, it's kind of like mixing modalities. So I'll talk about a little bit about my own experiences, but the majority will be about my research. And there'll be lots and lots of stories about owls.
Great. Are you working on another book now?
I'm going to do the audio book reading. I'm going to read it myself.
Great.
And then I'm going to be very careful to say it. So the question everyone asks after they finish the book, the first question they ask is there going to be a sequel? And I say, because the book just came out, and I was like, that's like asking a lady after she gives birth, like, you can have another baby? And like, yeah, so I'm getting to the point where I'm like taking that seriously. I can make no promises, but I'm considering part 2 of the book, The Unseen.
Mike, always a pleasure spending time with you, my friend. And a big hug to you in Seattle. Look forward to seeing you in about 5 or 6 weeks. And in the meantime, stay well. This is Peter Robbins with my special guest tonight, Mike Clelland. You stay well too. Stand up for what you believe in and be kind to each other. We'll see you next week.
Right on. Thank you so much.